This video is not meant to attack anyone or their religion, but instead it's an attempt to find the truth. And in order to find the truth, it's necessary to understand what is not truth and why. The one we're going to focus on in this video is the doctrine concerning Daniel's final week. This one is very important to Christians because they believe it's either about Jesus or the future Antichrist and the end of the world. It's based upon Daniel chapter 9, verses 24 through 27. So first we'll look at what the text actually says. Essentially, Gabriel tells Daniel that 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and thy holy city to finish the transgression, make an end of sins, make reconciliation for iniquity, bring in everlasting righteousness, seal up the vision and prophecy, and anoint the most holy. So we'll chart that here. He says there will be a total of 70 weeks until all these things occur, including the end of sins altogether, the sealing of the prophecy, and everlasting righteousness. So this end of the 70 weeks would seem to represent the end of the age when the Elohim return, because the end of sins and the bringing in of everlasting righteousness has not occurred yet. Then he says in verse 25, Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again and the wall, even in troublous times. So 7 weeks and 62, 1 score is 20, so this is saying after the commandment to restore, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks until Messiah. So 7 weeks and 62 weeks after the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem until Messiah. So this can be looked at two ways. Either it's 7 weeks until Messiah followed by 62 weeks until Messiah, or the 7 and 62 weeks both start at the going forth of the commandment. It can mean either one, but it's clear that Messiah shows up after both the 7 weeks and the 62 weeks. Because if Gabriel meant that Messiah would show up after 69 weeks, then he would have simply said that from the commandment to restore until Messiah will be 69 weeks. But he did not say that. He said from the commandment until Messiah will be both 7 and 62 weeks. So whether the 7 weeks and 62 weeks are parallel to each other or consecutive, one right after the other, Messiah must show up after both. That's what the text says. Okay, so let's continue with verse 26. And after 62 weeks, that's the 62 weeks right here, it says, After the 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself, and the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. So after the 62 weeks, Gabriel says Messiah will be cut off, and the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. So it seems clear that Messiah will be cut off at the start of the final week, because we're told there are a total of 70 weeks. Messiah will show up after both 7 and 62 weeks, which is a total of 69 weeks, and Messiah will be cut off after that. That only leaves 1 week left. So if Messiah is cut off and the city is destroyed after the 62 weeks, that indicates the destruction of the city occurs in the final week, because it clearly says the end of sins altogether will occur after 70 weeks. And verse 27 confirms that. It says, And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured out upon the desolate. So verse 26 tells us the city will be destroyed after the 62 weeks after Messiah is cut off, and verse 27 tells us the sacrifice and oblation will cease in the midst of 1 week. So there are two ways to look at this. If the 7 and 62 weeks are consecutive one after the other, then the cutting off of Messiah after the 62 weeks must occur at the start of the 70th week. If the 7 and 62 weeks are parallel, both starting at the commandment to restore, then we have 8 weeks left over. But here's the most important point. The original Hebrew word that was translated later as weeks is actually the word Shbui, and it has 3 different meanings. The first meaning is 7 singular, the second meaning is sevens plural, and the third meaning is the Feast of Weeks, called Shavuot, which occurs once per year. The way this word was translated in the King James and most of the English translations only makes use of one of these meanings. It leaves out the other two. It uses the meaning weeks, which refers to a period of 7 years. But this word can also refer to the Feast of Weeks, Shavuot, which occurs once per year. So if there are 8 Shbua left over after 62 Shbua, and 1 Shbua can refer to the Feast of Weeks in any given year, then 8 Shbua can equal 8 years. But again, the text is clear that in order for the prophecy to be fulfilled, the covenant must be confirmed and the final 7-year period completed before the 70th Shbua ends. So we have 2 possibilities, both equaling a total of 70 Shbuas. This one here that utilizes the full definition of the word Shbua, and this one here that only utilizes one of the 3 definitions of the word Shbua. Each one is valid. But now we're going to look at the most popular doctrines about this. This is a Wikipedia article that lists the varying interpretations of the Daniel 9 prophecy of 70 weeks. You can pause to read any of this here or go to their article and read it yourself, but I made a short outline here. And I just want to add, if anyone knows of any other doctrine, please feel free to leave a comment below. But basically, there are 2 main views of the Daniel 9 prophecy. The historicist view, which believes the Daniel 9 prophecy of 70 weeks occurred in the past, and the futurist view, which believes the 70 weeks will occur in the future. And there's also the dispensationalist view, which combines both. So again, these doctrines listed here are probably not all of the doctrines, but these are the most popular doctrines that you've probably heard about. So I'm going to show you why each of these doctrines is false. First, you'll notice that each one of these doctrines adds the 7 and 62 weeks together for a total of 69 weeks. There is variance in the exact year these doctrines place the start and the end of the 69 weeks, but they all add the 7 and 62 weeks together for a total of 69 weeks, and most of them fail to account for the Messiah's appearance at both the 7 and 62 weeks. So you can see on this table here, again, it doesn't matter which exact years they use for the start. The text is clear that Messiah shows up after both the 7 Shbua and the 62 Shbua. So they're all interpreting these Shbua as periods of 7 years. So the 7 Shbua, for example, represents 49 years in their doctrine, and the 62 Shbua represents 434 years. Their premise is that Jesus was the one called Messiah, but Jesus did not live for 434 years. So who represented the Messiah after the 7th Shbua? Gabriel listed the 7 Shbua as the first time period, so the timeline does not represent 434 years followed by 49 years. It represents 7 Shbua and 62 Shbua, just what it says. One of the doctrines did attempt to resolve that by coming up with something they call the first advent of Christ after the 7 Shbua and the second advent after 62 Shbua. But Gabriel does not mention anything about an advent. It says Messiah will show up. The word Messiah can also be translated as anointed one, but in the book of Daniel, all the governmental leaders are identified by code words. So this can also refer to someone who will be called Messiah. But regardless of who Messiah represents, it's clear that the text does not say that the advents will start after 7 and 62 Shbua, nor does it say Messiah will show up after 69 Shbua. It is clearly stated that Messiah will show up after 7 and 62 Shbua. So the first problem with most of these doctrines is that they do not account for the Messiah showing up after 7 weeks. They only account for it after a total of 69 or 70 weeks. And Jesus did not appear after both 7 and 62 weeks, only after 69 or 70, depending on what year starts it. The next problem with the standard timeline is that the destruction of the city after the 62 weeks did not occur within 1 week in Jesus' time. Some historicists argue that Jesus' crucifixion represented the destruction of the city in the midst of the week, but that can't be accurate. Even if Jesus represented a city symbolically, which he doesn't, the city was not destroyed in the midst of that week. Messiah was cut off, yes, and the city Jerusalem was destroyed, but the city was not destroyed until 70 CE, long after the 70th week ended on this timeline. So, dispensationalists have come up with what they believe is a resolution for this discrepancy. They've added a hiatus or a gap between the 69th and 70th week. They agree that the prince that shall come did not destroy the city until 70 CE, so they argue that an unknown period of time occurs in verse 26, in which the prince that shall come destroys the city and the sanctuary, and then at some point in the future, verse 27 will occur and the final 70th week will start with the confirming of a covenant, and 3.5 years later the Antichrist will stand in the temple and the sacrifice and oblation will cease. I'm not attacking anyone for trying to resolve a very obvious mistake. I mean, at least they recognized that the doctrine was flawed. But the problem with this is that Gabriel did not mention anything about a period of 2,000 plus years between the 69th and 70th week. Why would Gabriel be so precise with everything else in the prophecy but then let it fall apart? He clearly says there is a total of 70 weeks, not 70 weeks plus 2,000 years. So we'll add these two problems here. The destruction of the city in 70 CE did not occur in the midst of the 70th week, and Gabriel did not say the 70th week would occur 2,000 plus years after the 69th week. So as you can see, it doesn't matter which year they start, whether they start at Artaxerxes' decree or Nehemiah building the wall or the Edict of Cyrus. It doesn't matter which year they choose within these events. The prophecy says the destruction of the city will occur after 62 weeks, but before 70 weeks are completed. And the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 CE was long after that window closed. This attempted resolution doesn't help because over 2,000 years have passed. A total of 70 weeks does not mean 69 plus 2,000 plus 1. It means a total of 70 consecutive Shabuas. If there is an interval of time after Messiah is cut off, then it can only be a window of 1 year, which I'll explain later. And that's only if the 7 and 62 Shabuas are parallel, and they refer not to just 7-year periods, but also the Feast of Weeks holiday, which occurs each year. The only way I can see to truly resolve the problem is this. If the 7 and 62 Shabuas refer only to 7 and 62 periods of 7 years, then the term Messiah must refer to 2 different people. The first one would have appeared after 49 years, and the second after either 434 years or 483 years. If one wants to believe that the term Messiah in Daniel 9 refers to only one person, then the 7 and 62 Shabua must refer to 7 and 62 feasts of weeks. In other words, 7 and 62 Shavuots, which are roughly 7 and 62 years. So either one believes that the term Messiah in the book of Daniel refers only to Jesus, or one believes it refers to Jesus and someone else before him. If one believes the word Messiah refers only to Jesus, then the only part of this prophecy that was fulfilled in Jesus' time was either 69 or 70 weeks from the commandment to restore until Jesus. The rest of the prophecy was not fulfilled during Jesus' time. That's why they had to come up with this other doctrine, which is also flawed. So again, if the 7 and 62 Shabua refer only to 7 and 62 weeks, in other words, 7 and 62 7-year periods, or 7 and 62 times 7, then Messiah cannot refer to only one person because that time period exceeds 400 years. And Gabriel was clear that both time periods must culminate in Messiah. But if the term Messiah only referred to Jesus, then only part of the prophecy was fulfilled in Jesus' time, either the 69 or 70 weeks. And even then, only part of the 70-week prophecy would be fulfilled because it's clear that the end of sins did not occur at Jesus' time. They killed him, so that wasn't the end of sins. If anything, it was the beginning of a whole new era of even worse sins. The bringing in of everlasting righteousness did not occur at that time. So while Jesus was a partial fulfillment of the Daniel 9 prophecy, it was not a complete fulfillment. So the timeline, according to what Gabriel said, should look more like this. The commandment to restore Jerusalem, then 7 weeks until Messiah, and 62 weeks until Messiah. Then after 62 weeks, Messiah is cut off, and the people of the prince destroy the city and the sanctuary. And again, that has to occur before the 70 weeks are complete. So on this timeline, that means the prince would have to destroy the city within 7 years after the 62nd Shbua. And on this timeline here, the prince would have to destroy the city within 8 years after the 62nd Shbua. Then verse 27 says, "And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week." So that's the first point. It tells us clearly that the 1 week starts out with the confirming of a covenant. But here's the other point. The word translated as week was the Hebrew word Shbua, which means 3 things. 2 of those meanings refer to either a 7-year period or the Feast of Weeks, which is the time period each year that spans from Passover to Shavuot. So when it says, "He shall confirm the covenant for 1 Shbua," it can mean one of 2 things. Either the covenant will be confirmed at the beginning of the final 7-year period, or the covenant will be confirmed at the beginning of the Feast of Weeks, on or near Passover. Either way, it must end before the 70th Shbua ends. So there are 4 possible ways the Daniel 9 timeline can play out exactly the way it was written. Possibility 1 is that the 7 Shbua and 62 Shbua will occur consecutively, one after the other, for a total of 69 Shbua, followed by 1 final Shbua of 7 years. That would mean the one called Messiah would have to be cut off at the start of that final 7-year period, and the covenant would have to be confirmed at the beginning of that 7-year period as well. The interesting thing is, the word translated as cut off in verse 26 also means cut a covenant. So it may very well be saying that after 62 Shbua, Messiah will cut a covenant, but not for himself, and the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Then in verse 27, "And he shall confirm the covenant for 1 Shbua of 7 years." So the start of that 7 years can be fulfilled either by the cutting off of the one called Messiah and the confirming of the covenant by someone else, or the start of the 7 years can be fulfilled by the cutting of a covenant by the one called Messiah, and the one called Messiah will confirm the covenant for 1 Shbua of 7 years. So this is the first possibility. The second possibility is that the one called Messiah will be cut off after the 62nd Shavuot, and the covenant will be confirmed at the start of the Feast of Weeks any time in that 7-year period, as long as it occurs before the end of the 70th Shbua. That is, the covenant would be confirmed on or around Passover of any year before the end of the 70th year. So that's the second possibility. The third possibility is that the 7 Shbua and 62 Shbua will occur parallel to each other, both starting at the commandment to restore. In that case, there would be 8 Shbua left over to complete the 70 Shbua. We know the 1 Shbua can refer to a period of 7 years, but we also know 1 Shbua can refer to the Feast of Weeks each year. That means the total 70 Shbua can refer to a total of 70 Feasts of Weeks, in other words, 70 Shavuots, which is roughly 70 years. In this case, the covenant would have to be confirmed either immediately at the end of the 62nd Shbua or 1 year after the 62nd Shbua. That's the third possibility. And the fourth possibility is that the 7 and 62 Shbua will run parallel, both starting at the commandment to restore, and after the 62nd Shbua, the one called Messiah will be cut off, and sometime in the remaining 8 years, the covenant will be confirmed on or around Passover, and the city destroyed sometime between the 7 weeks between Passover and Shavuot, before the 70th Shbua end. So that's the fourth possibility. Okay, but in verse 27, who does it say is confirming the covenant? Obviously, it refers to the person mentioned just before verse 27 in verse 26. But there are two people mentioned in verse 26, Messiah and the prince that shall come. So there are three possibilities here that I can see. Either the one called Messiah is going to confirm a covenant for one Shbua, or the prince that shall come will confirm a covenant for one Shbua, or the prince that shall come is the one called Messiah. So the Daniel 9 timeline is very clear. 70 Shbua are determined to do all these things, including the complete end of sins and the bringing in of everlasting righteousness. Someone called Messiah will show up both 7 and 62 Shbua after a commandment goes forth to restore Jerusalem. After the 62 Shbua, Messiah will either be cut off or cut a covenant, and the prince that shall come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. He will confirm the covenant for one Shbua, and in the midst of the one Shbua he will cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate. So before we discuss all the details of this prophecy, we first need to make sure the timeline itself is charted exactly as it says. Again, from what I can tell, there are 4 possibilities. The timeline can either look like this, possibility 1, or like this, possibility 2, or this, possibility 3, or this, possibility 4. It cannot look like this, which is the popular doctrine, and it cannot look like this, which is another popular doctrine. So next week we'll go into more of the details about this prophecy to show more reasons that we know the popular doctrines concerning this are wrong. And for more information on how this timeline in Daniel 9 has been coming true for the past 67 years, you can check out the playlist Bible's Countdown to the Meteorite and Rescue, and I'll also leave the link below. Thank you so much to those who are making this work possible. I hope you're doing well, and I'll talk to you next week.